There's a lot you can learn from Out of the Past.
Welcome, I'm Lenny and this is Jim. We're back with Martin County Historical Society's Out of the Past. Today we're going to take a look at part 2 of the interview with Richard Bradley about Avery Weightronics. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, the first part was excellent. Looking forward to seeing the rest of it today.
That sounds good. But before we do that, did you bring something along today?
You got me. You know I did.
Okay.
The first thing we've got here, this is an iron. And now, kind of counterintuitive because irons tend to flatten things, but this one was made to put wrinkles and pleats into different garments, and it's called a fluting iron.
Huh.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, very, very interesting. I still don't know that I would iron my clothes, but...
Yeah. Mine come out naturally that way.
Yeah. And then we've got this little item here. This is called a time computer.
Where'd that come from, a bank?
Yes, and this was actually invented by a gentleman from Fairmont, H.H. Allison, and what it's meant to do is tell you how many days of the year have elapsed and how many are yet to go, so you can calculate interest without having to thumb through a book. You know, this is actual calculator days.
So you just go to the date and it'll show you how many days have elapsed and how many are left, huh?
Yep, so it'll show you how many have elapsed, how many are yet to go, and it should all add up to 365. And if it happened to be a leap year, you could remove the cylinder inside and put in a special leap year cylinder, and you have the instructions for changing it right on the bottom there. So if you encountered a leap year, you were still covered.
Interesting.
Yeah, lots of fun things.
There it is. Well, should we take a look at the interview?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. We're back at the Pioneer Museum, and I'm visiting with Richard Bradley. He gave us a background on how Weightronics got started and how you came to Fairmont and Armstrong and the Midwest. Today, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the products, the impact they had on the company and its growth.
Right, I'll be glad to do that one. So I brought with me today 2 products that I believe, based on my research, had the greatest impact upon the company's growth. The first is the Model 500. This is the analog indicator that was used on the grinder mixers, and the weigh bars would be plugged into this because they would provide the weight information to the scale. And the scale, as you can see, it's got a weight set, it's got weight readout, it's got an on-off switch, it's got a zero adjust, and it's got a meter here that's used for zero adjust also. So basically, I don't want to get into all the details, but essentially what happens is they would be loading this thing with stuff. This meter would move left or right all the way over, and then you'd use this thumb wheel to bring it back to zero. When you bring it back to zero, that would be the weight readout. That would tell you what the weight is that's inside the grinder mixer.
And this is what really got the company started.
Yes, this got the company started. Without this, the company wouldn't have existed.
How many of these do you think were made?
It's between 85 and 100,000. It's in that area, maybe even more than that. And there are 3 weigh bars per each scale, so that tells you we're talking $250,000 to 300,000 weigh bars just for this scale.
Wow. Yeah.
All right, and that was done over a period of 10, 11 years. And this scale itself was in existence. They continued to sell these for about 8 years. They eventually came up with a digital version of this about 5 years after this was developed.
And what year was this started?
1970.
1970.
Yeah. It was the actual indicator was designed back at Mechanical Systems in New Jersey when Dad was developing the weigh bar. And he had one of his electrical engineers design that. So they did that. So that pretty much gives you a little bit about that, but it was crucial. That's what the income from the sale of this is what provided the capital to make the company, give it the ability to go and develop other scales and other products. I wanted to bring also this. This is a Model 100 indicator. This is the industrial indicator. You got the display, and you've got a zero set, and it tells you some other things about the weight capacity and the accuracy. The significance of this scale was a year after Dad started up Weightronics in Armstrong. He said it became real apparent that the farming industry was a fickle industry. And I said, what do you mean? He says, it's all dependent on the weather. He said, if you have a great growing season, the farmers have lots of money. They'll buy product.
Sure.
He says, but if you don't have a good growing season, there ain't money out there. And he says, that hurts. So he said, I realized I had to branch out into something that had more stability. And he looked at the industrial sector because there's so many possible applications for weighing. Because basically everything that exists, just about, is some point in its life cycle is weighed. There's always going to be something going on with weight. So he wanted to build this scale, and his dream was to build a scale, he said, not just an industrial indicator, but a legal for trade industrial indicator. And the significance of that was that at that time, when you got to remember, when he came out with this, the weighing industry was all mechanical. They had tried a few half-hearted attempts at doing electronic scales with load cells. But as I previously mentioned in the last part one, when he was at the Iowa show, they were explaining those load cells were very unreliable and farmers didn't like them. So he said, we had to overcome that resistance because
Change the name.
and that's why he changed the name. But also the product itself, the Waybar, proved to be extremely robust invention, and there's a whole bunch of stuff about why that was. So he started working on this with his engineers, Michael and Green and Bill Hemme, two engineers that he had acquired from Collins Radio in Cedar Rapids. And Bill was his chief engineer, and Mike was the radio and electronics engineer. So they started working on this, and they got this prototype developed. And then they had the Bureau of Weights and Measures, they sent out one of their senior inspectors, Arto Warnloff. And Arto came out to do the certification testing on this. And it had to be 0.1% accurate.
Wow.
All right, not 1%. This is a 1% scale. But for legal trade, it would be 0.1%. And so they deliberately designed it so it was actually 0.05% accurate. So they did the testing on it, and Michael and Green said everything went fine. They had this 24 by 24 inch deck scale that this was connected to, which Dad had designed the 6 months previous. And they were running, and everything was fine. And then he said, Arto goes over and he brings out this little box with these small weights in. He starts putting them on the thing. And Bill said, Mike said, I knew we were blankety blank. And he said what he was trying to do, he wanted to see when the thing would shift from, like, let's say 101 pounds to 102 pounds. So those weights were like in tenth of a pound increments. And he was seeing that it wasn't changing till the 9/10. And Otto said to him, that's not right. It can't do that. They said, what do you mean? It's got to be at 0.5. At halfway through the weight, it's got to shift.
Yeah, sure.
So they were a little bit panicky, but that night he and Bill sat down and they reworked the circuitry, redesigned a section, built a prototype, put it in there. Otto came out the next day, worked like a charm.
Wow.
He certified it, and it became the first industrial scale, first electronic scale that was certified legal for trade in the world, in the entire world, not just the United States, but the entire world.
Question for you. Were these scales maybe the forerunner to what we have now, like in grocery stores and things like that?
Oh yeah. In fact, Electronics sells a ton of grocery scales.
They do.
Yeah, and their competitors do too, Mettler, Toledo, and others. But yeah, they sell a lot of weighing scales for the food industry. So those two are the biggest thing. This sent earthquakes through the industry because the big three, what I call the big three, Hal Richardson, Fairbanks Morse, and Toledo, were all entrenched mechanical scale manufacturers. They gave half-hearted attempts to designing electronic scales, but because their half-hearted attempts failed, it just kind of confirmed in their mind weighing is best left to the mechanical industry. Well, Dad was not accepting that. He said, I don't buy that. I'm convinced we have a winnable product here.
Sure.
So that's why they developed it. So when this did get certified, it was like groundbreaking. I mean, it altered the entire weighing. That moved the weighing industry from mechanical scales to electronic scales, just by itself, that one scale. And that opened up a bunch of doors. So then you come along, after this, they had the farm platform scale, which was still another scale for farmers they could put at their farms, all right? Besides having the grinder mixer scale, they could have a platform scale. But then this year, they started developing the low profile scale where you could drive a forklift on and you had weights and you could read that.
Like in elevators too, or a big truck or a semi would.
That came along a little bit later, about 1974. They developed a truck platform scale. The first prototype was at Northrop Elevator.
Really?
The very first prototype was there at Northrop Elevator. He knew Wendy Becker
Yeah.
really well. They were good friends. They both served on the First National Bank together. And Wendy was complaining to Dad, I got to spend money to upgrade my scale. It's going to cost me a lot of money. And Dad was just in the stages of developing the prototype. Says, hey, would you mind being a guinea pig? And so Wendy's like, oh yeah, I can save myself a lot of money. Sure, go ahead, go for it. So they did, and it worked out. It was great. It turned out. So they did that. Then they came up with what they call a steel bridge truck scale, which my father designed and developed, which is the scale you see like at Pooley's, the scrapyard.
Sure.
And you see them all over the country now. It's a beautiful scale. It's an all steel bridge. It doesn't require a pit, just some piers, and you set it on. It's like a steel bridge, and it can weigh 150,000 pounds. It can handle up 150,000 pounds. But you think about all the scales. The other big scale that they took on, that Dad developed, was the forklift scale, and that required some special engineering because he said I wanted the forks on a forklift to become the load cell, right, to be doing the weighing. But the problem, he says, forks have a bending moment. Where's that load on that fork? That changes the weight readout. So I had to develop a scale that would, a load cell that would only see shear force, just straight up and down. And so it took them a couple of years to get that developed. And today, that whole division, they spend a lot of, goes down the, excuse me, Tennessee, Nashville, where all the hub for all the 7 largest trucking firms in the United States are located. And they're huge. They're just bananas about the forklift scale. And the story behind that, when they developed their prototype, Dad had a friend in New Jersey, salesman there, and said, come out here, I got a chemical plant. They're very interested in what you're doing. They'd like to try out your prototype. So Dad brought the prototype out there, and here's the deal. Back in the day, when the manufacturing, the forklift would go up to the semi at the dock, take the pallet off, then they drive over to a scale, set it down on that weight, and then take it and put it wherever it had to be in the factory. But with the forklift scale, they pick it up. They instantly know what the weight is, and they go straight to where it has to go. And what happened that day, their one driver was doing the work of 5 drivers.
Boy, yeah.
With that skill, that's how much more. And they would not give Dad back his prototype. Said, "The heck with this, Dick. You can go make more. We'll buy this. Whatever you want. We're not giving it to you." Because they save so much money.
Sure.
So that's how that skill took off.
We got a couple more things there. What are those?
Well, I wanted to talk. We keep talking about weigh bars, all right? And I wanted to show you. I don't know if you can see that. This is a weigh bar, and you can see those little tiny devices. Those are called strain gauges. All right, and they're what do all the weight reading. They're what tell the indicator what's going on. So I'll take that back now, okay? And the way that works is these little devices are tiny grid work of what they call electroresistive wire, and they apply a current to this, and what happens is it has a little resistance in the current because of the size of the wires and the design. When the bar bends, which only is a few thousandths at most, that changes the shape of the strain gauge, and that changes the resistance, and they can convert that resistance to a weight readout very accurately. It's extremely accurate.
And so small.
It is so small. Yeah, it's very small. And I just, this is another one. This is one he just made as a tool to give to all his employees, and they also, salesmen used it to hand out to customers and stuff like that so they could see what the weigh bar was all about.
It's kind of a small item, too.
Yes, it is, exactly. And they make scales that are anywhere from basically 1 pound up to 300-ton train scales.
Wow.
And so, train scales and crane scales are the same size. And they have all kinds of weights. Now, the book I'm writing called From Obscurity to World Leader, the story of how a small, unknown company in a tiny community like this became a worldwide leader. I closed the proscript with the development of their quartz cell technology, which is the latest technology. And that story is very interesting because it's another significant shift in the company's growth and where it's going. In '88, Dad got a call. He was having a party at the house. He had the board of directors from Stavely at the house, from a scientist in someplace in Washington or Oregon. And he's telling Dad, I have invented this kind of technology, quartz cell technology. He described it to my father. But typical of scientists and esoteric individuals. They're not good marketers. They don't know the practical application. So this guy was describing this to me. I said, I immediately knew what we could do with this. How the guy got my father's name, I don't know. But he called my father because he got the name. So Dad told the chairman of the board who was at the party, he said, well, let's go. Dad, what do you mean, let's go? I've got the jet here, the British jet. It was out of the airport. So he grabbed Dad, they got in the jet, and they flew out there. They sat down with the guy, negotiated a deal, and Dad bought the technology, and they brought it back to Fairmont. Dad says to me, it was not quite as developed as far as he had led us to believe. It took him 6 years to iron out the kinks and develop the technology so that they make that scale. But that scale, that quartz cell technology will have as big an impact on weighing as the Weibar did in its day.
You said Stavely. That's a British or English company?
Yes, a British company is a large holding company. They purchased Weightronics in 1988. What happened was the company was growing and he was looking at purchasing NCI, which was a competitor in California. And he felt that there was good synergy between the two companies. They didn't compete directly. They only had a small overlap, but he said, well, this would be a great way to get into this other market. And so they were going to do that. But they didn't have enough cash to purchase NCI. Well, Stavely came and said, well, we'll provide the cash. In return, we get X% of stock of Weightronics.
So they combined then?
Yeah, so Stavely provided the money, Dad bought NCI, and they combined the two companies together. And so that was in 1988. And so that's that. I don't want to get too much in it, but you also asked me about the eras. If you look at the growth of Weightronics, there's 3 eras. There's the era when Dad managed the company from 1970 to 1990. Then there's what I call the Stavely Industries era from basically 1990 to about 2000, 2001. Right? And then there was a very short period of some investors who bought Weightronics, and they tried to make a go of it. And that only lasted about a year and a half, and they sold it to ITW, Illinois Two Works, who owns Weightronics.
Owns it now, sure.
And they're headquartered in Illinois. And so those are the 3 eras. And I would say the 2 eras that were best for the company was when Dad had it and now ITW. ITW is a pretty well-run organization. And they don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. They got so many different technology companies. But they recognize those technology companies are successful because they know what they're doing.
They more or less support it then?
They support them. They don't get in there and start messing things up. Unlike Stavely that came in the 90s, they started changing everything. And it almost destroyed the company. People don't realize that. It just devastated the company. We lost several hundred employees and just had to cut backs. And I have a whole section about that. So that's it. But if you also had asked me, well, what would I say at the end? In my research, I would offer, I thought about this, the following advice to young people, okay? If you have a dream, take the time to acquire the necessary knowledge and know-how that you'll need to pursue that dream. Your dreams just don't magically appear.
Sure.
If you look at my dad's story and other entrepreneurs, they had to learn and develop the skills to be able to make that dream come to reality. And that could take years, all right? It really could. But I don't give up. Don't let that pursuit build within you the confidence and conviction that your dream is achievable. You've got to have
stick with it.
Stick with it. Don't give up. And see, don't let failure dampen, all right, your pursuit of your dream. Seek to find and learn the opportunities that the failure can bring to the pursuit of your dream. All right, there are opportunities. Oftentimes, people come to what may appear to be a dead end. All right, which may tempt them to give up and throw in the towel. All right, but this attitude was best summed up by Mike Lundgren, Dad's engineer. And I was talking to Mike, and he said, "Let me tell you about your father." He said, "It was never a good idea for anyone to tell Dick Bradley it couldn't be done." He said Dick Bradley took that as a personal challenge.
That inspired him.
It inspired him, all right? And Mike said to me, we'd be sitting in his office, we'd be discussing some new idea that your father concocted up. He had so many different ideas, it was unbelievable. And he'd sketch them out on paper napkins and stuff like that, and he'd talk to them about it. And he said, we'd argue with him. I said, Dick, that technology doesn't even exist. How can we do that? And Dick said, then develop the damn technology. That's what he would tell them. And so they said, after the argument and discussion, we'd all get behind it, and by golly, we would work to develop the technology to design the scale, and many times it was successful.
When you think about him starting back in New Jersey and throughout the course of time, the number of lives, families that have been impacted in a positive way,
Right.
just astounding.
That blew me away. As I've interviewed for the book now, I've interviewed almost 70 people.
Uh-huh.
And one thing I take away from they repeatedly tell me how much Dad meant to them. And I had no idea this was going, because I was living in Wheaton, Illinois with my wife. We were raising a family. I wasn't here in Fairmont. I didn't know what was going on. And every one of them, they all would say, especially the production workers, they said, if it wasn't for your dad, I wouldn't have met my spouse here. I couldn't have afforded to raise the family that we wanted to raise. He took care of us. He made sure we had a decent wage and all that kind of stuff. And, I saw it in the video of his retirement. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, and people, just were brokenhearted that, this was era that was coming to an end. But it was such fondness and such love. And I have so many anecdotal stories that people would tell me, they all said the same thing. Your dad respected us. He never made us feel like any problem that was going on was our fault. And so Rita Rippentrop, one of the ladies who worked in the production line doing the gear train to that device, said we started having problems with the gear train binding up. And we couldn't figure out what the heck was going on, and I was getting frustrated. He says, well, I'm working on this thing one day, and next thing you know, I could hear this breathing over my shoulder. I turned around, it's your father standing over watching me, and he says, you have no idea how intimidating that is. The president of this company, and I'm just there for 2 weeks, and he's there, and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in big trouble. And so he's watching me, and he says, Rita, get up, let me sit down and see what I can do. And so he says, your dad sits down at my bench, and he's working on this, and after about 5 minutes, he throws his hands up, and he says, well, if I can't fix this blankety-blank thing, who else? How can I expect my workers to do this? Sure. So Rita said, he grabbed that gear train, walked off into his office, and everyone said the same thing. We all knew what your father was going to do. He was going to solve the problem. And he said, he did solve the problem. But he never blamed us.
Sure.
And that's when they said the same thing about Vince. They said, Vince Del Sancho, he knew everybody by their first name in the entire plant. We're talking over 300 employees.
Yeah, sure.
And he'd walk up and just start talking to them and ask them questions all the time. So they had a great relationship, yeah.
In closing here, you got a couple of things
Sure.
I'd like to talk about. Just tell us a little bit about that and this book.
This here, the Agricultural Hall of Fame, University of Kansas, I think it is, they called my father and they said, you're up for introduction into the Agricultural Hall of Fame as one of the 2 inventors having the most impact on agriculture in the 20th century. And so he was most proud of this award. And so this was something he got. Mm-hmm. They said that, your scales have impacted agriculture more significantly than anything we can imagine. You have no idea. And what's interesting about that? When I moved back here, I met some friends and became friends with some of them were hog farmers. Mm-hmm. And they started talking about that. And Waitronics, they said, Richard, the hog industry in Martin County and in Minnesota would not be what it is today without Waitronics. Because of the stationary feed mixer. The invention of the stationary feed mixer changed the whole rules of the game. It made it possible for us to mix and produce feed and grain with all the nutrients in the most in such volumes that we could expand our operations. We couldn't do this before. But that scale made it all possible. Mm-hmm. So that's that.
And this is called a patent book. How many patents do you think
he's got? 14 or 15 patents, all mostly related to weighing, different types of weighing devices. He's even got a bathroom scale, and I still have the prototype. It still runs. It's in our bathroom at our home on Shore Acres Drive, and I get on it every morning just to see what I weigh. But he made one prototype, and he said, we killed the project after that. And I said, why? He says, well, they were coming online with these cheapo units. He says, we couldn't build these things for as cheap as they were selling. So it was good technology. It did great, but he said we decided not to try to go down that road. We decided to focus on where we were at with the industrial stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, that kind of sums up, gives you a little overview of Waitronics. There's a lot more in the book. Like I said, the book is going to be over 400 pages.
When will it come out, do you think?
Well, I am working earnestly to finish it and get it ready for editing end of this year.
Okay.
And it has to go through editing. It may have to go through 1 or 2 passes. It just depends. So I'm thinking it would be ready for publication in June of next year.
Well, it's getting close.
Yeah, it's getting close, and we'll see what happens with that. My goal with that book is to tell the story. The story has a lot of anecdotal stories because it's a human interest story. I became very clear that Dad said to me before he died, he said to me one day sitting in his chair, I said, I feel like I'm the most fortunate executive in the world. I said, really? Why would you say that, Dad? He says, because I had the best people in the world working for me. These people came to Waitronix because they needed a job. He says, but they stayed because they became believers in the company and what it was trying to achieve. He says, you cannot ask for better employees than that. And to his dying day, he said, Fairmont's greatest asset is its people. He said, the work ethic of the people in this town is phenomenal.
Well, Richard, thank you very much.
welcome.
Glad you came. Great story.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
Sure, you're welcome.
That was a great interview. Richard has just
Yeah.
a lot of information about Waitronix, a lot of things that I didn't know. I don't know
Yeah.
if you did or not, Jim, but yeah, very interesting. Very
Yeah.
knowledgeable. He's very knowledgeable about the topic. Of course, his dad was the one who started Waitronix.
Sure. Yeah, quite the history there.
Yeah,
Of a
absolutely.
great business for our area. So we want to thank him again, Richard, for coming on the show. And thank you all for watching. And Lenny, I calculate that we'll be back next time.
Sounds good.
So thank you all for watching Martin County Historical Society's Out of the Past.